Welcome to the deep dive. So, if you've been paying, well, any attention at all to technology news recently.
Which is hard to avoid.
Exactly. It's everywhere. The air is just thick with talk about artificial intelligence.
Particularly the large language models, right? Things like ChatGPT.
Right. ChatGPT, yeah.
Yeah.
And it's not just talk. It's this intense excitement, almost a kind of fervor.
Headlines yelling, revolutionary, life-changing.
Or even, the end of jobs as we know them, that kind of thing.
And it's exactly that sort of collective, well, euphoria maybe, that overwhelming sense that this is some huge technological leap. That's why we need this particular deep dive today.
Okay.
Because we're not looking at the usual celebratory sources today. We're focusing on a really prominent, actually highly critical counter-narrative.
A counter-narrative.
Yeah, a voice that fundamentally challenges the whole basis, the intellectual premise of what we think these systems are actually doing, what they're achieving.
Okay, right. So we're stepping back from the glossy PR, the tech demos that look amazing. And our mission here, for you listening, is to really pull out the core arguments from this critical source. The arguments that just flat out dismiss the claims that AI is intelligent.
Exactly.
We're not just questioning, how fast it's developing. We're questioning the nature of the development itself. Is it even the kind of development we think it is?
That's precisely it. And we need to get our heads around the central, really shocking claim in this critique. Which is that these systems, the ones everyone's talking about, they aren't evidence of intelligence, not of thought, not even of genuine language learning.
Wow. Okay, so if not that, then what?
Then, according to this source, they are at their core, and this is the phrase used, sophisticated high-tech plagiarism.
Plagiarism, okay. That one phrase completely reframes the conversation, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. It shifts everything from, admiration and awe to deep skepticism.
That is a huge claim, and why we need to spend some time on this. So for this deep dive, we're going past the headlines. We're going to look at the mechanics, the claimed lack of intellectual value.
Right.
And also the immediate practical dangers that this particular source identifies. We're basically putting the hype under a very critical microscope.
And challenging its foundations using scientific skepticism based on the source material.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's start with maybe the biggest intellectual dismissal in the source material. It really does set the tone for everything else.
Sure.
The author claims, flat out, that a huge amount, maybe most, of the discussion around ChatGPT and these kinds of devices is, quote, totally groundless.
Yeah, totally groundless. That's a strong statement.
It's incredibly strong, especially when you think about the billions, literally billions of dollars pouring into this tech, the global focus. To call it groundless is, well, it's brutal.
It sounds like hyperbole, I know, but the reasoning behind it is quite specific. It's not just about whether the output is good or bad right now. It's about the fundamental design constraints of the systems themselves. The core detail here, the linchpin of the argument, is that these systems are designed in such a way, inherently, that in principle they can tell us absolutely nothing.
Nothing about what?
Nothing about language, how humans learn language, nothing about intelligence or thought, at least not in the way cognitive scientists or linguists study these things.
Right. So the argument isn't just it's not truly intelligent yet. It's this type of system, by its very nature, cannot teach us about intelligence.
Exactly. It's an argument about inherent limitations based on the architecture.
So from a scientific perspective, if the goal is understanding human cognition, these things are a dead end, according to this source.
That's the argument. A complete nullity from an intellectual standpoint, even if they're impressive from, say, an engineering or computational standpoint.
Okay, that distinction is key. Engineering success versus scientific insight.
Precisely. We need to separate two very different ambitions that have historically driven AI research. Well, think back to the early days, maybe the 1950s, 60s. A lot of AI research then was what you might call symbolic AI.
Okay.
It aimed to build systems that actually modeled the rules and the structures of human thought. The goal was, in a way, to build a working model of the mind.
To test hypotheses about how we think, how we learn language, how logic works.
Exactly. You build a system based on rules you hypothesize are active in the human mind, and you see if it works. That could potentially tell you something about cognition.
But current large language models aren't like that.
Not at all, according to this perspective. They are purely statistical pattern-matching machines. They operate entirely on correlation, not on understanding rules or meaning.
Okay, let's follow that. So if the old symbolic AI tried to model the how of thinking,
Mm-hmm.
These new statistical models are only trying to achieve the what meaning output that looks like coherent language.
Yes. Regardless of the mechanism underneath, they are incredibly good, phenomenally good, at predicting which sequence of words is most likely to follow another sequence of words. Based on having processed literally trillions of examples of human writing from the internet and books, they learn statistical patterns.
But because they're essentially black boxes optimized just for predicting the next word based on probabilities.
Right. They don't offer any real insight into the underlying processes. The biological cognitive mechanisms that allow a child to learn language or allow a human to have a genuinely new idea.
So they can mimic the output of cognition, but they can't illuminate the process of cognition itself.
That's the core argument, and therefore, this source deems them irrelevant to cognitive science, irrelevant to the scientific goal of understanding the mind.
Okay, but I have to push back slightly here, playing devil's advocate for a moment, maybe voicing what some listeners are thinking.
Let's do.
If the output is so good, I mean, these things can write essays, they can write code, they pass the bar exam, medical licensing exams. Doesn't that functional success, doesn't that count as intelligence in some meaningful way? Regardless of whether the internal mechanism is like a human brain, is the source maybe getting too hung up on the how and missing the revolutionary what?
That is absolutely the critical question, the main point of skepticism against this critique. And the source definitely anticipates it.
And the answer is?
The answer, from this perspective, is that confusing impressive performance with genuine intellectual insight is the fundamental mistake. It's the error that fuels all the hype.
Okay.
The source just doubles down, asserting there is no scientific interest and no intellectual interest in these models as they currently function. Because they are just artifacts of correlation, they reflect the patterns in the data they were trained on.
So they're not models of the mind?
No, they are models of the data that minds have produced.
Ah, okay. That's a really important distinction. It's like simulating the effect versus understanding the cause.
Exactly. You can build, say, a perfect simulation of weather patterns. It might predict the weather incredibly accurately.
Yeah.
But the simulation itself doesn't necessarily advance our fundamental understanding of atmospheric physics or thermodynamics. It's a tool that uses that understanding, perhaps, but it's not the source of it.
It's a tool for predicting or testing, not a source of basic scientific discovery in itself.
Precisely. And so the conclusion follows. If this technology, these LLMs, can't actually shed light on how language works, how learning happens in humans, then their value is strictly limited.
Limited
to computation, to generating output. It can produce sentences that look real, that sound real, but for genuine intellectual discovery about the nature of mind and language, it's a dead end, according to this view.
And this critique is really important because, as you said, this tech isn't just being sold as a useful tool. It's being framed as a new form of thought, a breakthrough in intelligence itself.
Mm-hmm. And the source gives a really pointed example of how this sort of uncritical embrace happens in the real world.
Which example is that?
It cites a specific New York Times article by Thomas Friedman.
Ah, yes. Friedman often writes about big technological shifts.
He does. And in this instance, he was apparently completely swept up, accepting the technology wholesale, describing it with really grandiose terms.
What sort of terms?
Things like Promethean, calling it potentially the greatest advance ever.
Wow. Promethean, like bringing fire from the gods, that's not small praise.
Not at all. And when influential commentators like Friedman use language that potent, it really helps solidify the idea in the public mind that we're witnessing a genuine cognitive revolution.
Not just a really big, really fast statistical calculation.
Exactly. The source argues the problem isn't Friedman's enthusiasm, per se, it's the misattribution. He sees the output, which is statistically polished, remember, and he concludes the machine understands that it has that Promethean spark.
Whereas the source insists?
The source insists the machine holds no fire at all. It's just reflecting the entire history of human fire, all our texts, all our ideas packed into the training data back at us, just organized by probability.
So you have this massive disconnect. On one side, you have critics saying, look, it's a statistical engine, it has no understanding, no ethics.
Right.
And on the other, you have commentators, and maybe a lot of the public, saying, wow, this is the dawn of superintelligence.
And that's why this critique serves as such a necessary, well, a counter-idea, a counter-argument to all of the hype that you, the listener, are probably encountering all the time.
It forces us to pause and ask,
Yeah.
Is impressive output the same as understanding?
Exactly. We need to internalize this idea that just because something sounds convincing, looks coherent, doesn't automatically mean it has intellectual depth or cognitive validity behind it. It creates critical distance.
So if we accept this source's critique, at least for the sake of argument, we have to stop thinking of ChatGPT as some kind of baby mind and start seeing it purely as a very powerful, very specialized computational tool.
A tool and nothing more. That's the argument.
Okay, so to quickly recap Section 1, forget genuine intelligence, according to this source. From a scientific and intellectual standpoint, these systems tell us nothing fundamental about the mind. The hype around cognitive breakthroughs, totally groundless.
That's the position laid out.
Right. Now, let's lift the hood. Let's understand why the source makes this claim. What is the technical reality that leads to the conclusion that this is just glorified plagiarism?
Okay, so we're moving from the sort of philosophical argument about intellectual value, or lack thereof,
Right.
to the actual mechanics. How does the thing work? And this leads us straight to that really provocative definition we mentioned earlier.
Sophisticated, high-tech plagiarism.
Exactly.
That word, plagiarism, it's so loaded. We think of cheating, stealing ideas, presenting someone else's work as your own. How does that apply to an AI spitting out text?
Well, it applies, according to this argument, because the system isn't creating concepts from scratch. It's not reasoning from first principles.
Rearranging.
It's rearranging and statistically refining material that already exists within its massive training data. The source says the operation, basically what it comes down to, is sophisticated high-tech plagiarism.
Okay, break that down. How is that plagiarism?
Think about it like this. Imagine you could somehow take every book ever written, every article at every website, every scrap of text humanity has produced.
Okay, an unimaginable amount of data.
Right. And you blend it all together into some kind of textual soup. And then you build an engine that's incredibly good at pulling out sequences of words from that soup, sequences that are statistically likely to follow one another to form coherent sentences and paragraphs.
Yeah, that engine is the LLM.
That engine is the LLM. It's synthesizing text based entirely on the patterns found in the pre-existing material it was fed. It doesn't add new ideas. It just reconstructs old ones in new combinations based on probability.
So it's plagiarizing in the sense that all its output is derived directly from input created by others.
That's the argument. It's a highly efficient synthesis engine, recombining prior content. Hence, plagiarism, just done by a machine at incredible scale.
Now, to make this easier to grasp, the source uses a great analogy.
Yes, the glorified autofill analogy, which is quite effective, I think.
We all use autofill, right?
Yeah.
You type sincerely, and your email suggests yours or regards.
Exactly. Your computer's making a simple prediction about the next likely word based on common patterns and the immediate context.
And the source is saying these incredibly complex LLMs are doing fundamentally the same thing.
Fundamentally, yes. They are, quote, ways of making a good guess about what your next word ought to be in a sequence of words.
But obviously it feels much more sophisticated than simple autofill.
Oh, absolutely. The sophistication comes purely from the scale and the complexity of the calculation.
Okay, let's get into that scale. Because if it's just guessing the next word, how does it write a 5,000-word essay that makes sense, that stays on topic, that doesn't just become gibberish?
Right. That's where the engineering genius comes in, and the sheer computational power. It's not just looking at the last 2 or 3 words like simple autofill.
It has a bigger memory?
A vastly bigger memory or context window. It might be keeping track of thousands of words or tokens that came before. And crucially, every single time it predicts the next word, it's not just a simple guess.
What is it then?
It's a complex calculation that reevaluates that entire context window. It uses incredibly complex mathematics involving those parameters we hear about to figure out the probability of every possible next word, considering the overall topic, the tone it's adopted, the structure it's already built.
So it's still prediction, but the prediction is constantly informed by a huge amount of preceding text.
Yes. It's like playing an extrapolation game, but on a godlike level, using supercomputers.
And the analogy helps us see past the magic.
Exactly. The analogy helps break through that feeling that the machine must be thinking. You know, when your phone suggests morning after you type good, you don't think your phone is intelligent.
No, of course not.
But when a machine strings together billions of these statistical predictions, and the result is a perfectly grammatical, contextually relevant, internally consistent essay, suddenly we leap to attributing thought.
And the source says that leap is a mistake.
A mistake driven purely by the scale and the polish of the final output. It's still just sophisticated autofill, just scaled up astronomically.
Okay, let's talk more about that scale then, because that seems to be the key to the illusion. What are the specific resources mentioned in the source that make this autofill look so revolutionary?
Right, this is where the infrastructure becomes mind-boggling. We're talking about needing an astronomical database to train on, an extraordinary database.
A blended soup of human text, we mentioned.
Exactly. Then you need supercomputers just to process it all, to run the models. And underpinning the model itself are these things called parameters. The source mentions a couple of billion parameters strung together.
Billions. We hear that term parameters all the time with AI. Can you give us like a simple way to visualize what these billions of parameters are actually doing?
Okay, imagine a giant, ridiculously complex sound mixing board, like for a huge concert.
Right.
Each parameter is like a single tiny knob or slider on that board. It controls one very specific thing, maybe how much influence word A has on the probability of word B appearing later in a certain context.
So billions of tiny little adjustment knobs.
Billions, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Each one interacts with potentially millions of others, and the training process for an LLM is basically the supercomputer spending months or years tweaking all these billions of knobs.
Tweaking them how? Towards what goal?
Tweaking them until the output of the model, the text it generates, statistically matches the patterns found in the original human training data as closely as possible. It's finding the optimal settings for all those billions of knobs to make the most human-like text.
So the sheer density of these adjustable connections, these parameters, is what lets it mimic human language so accurately.
That's the idea. It's the difference between, I don't know, trying to build a bridge with a handful of Lego bricks versus having billions of custom-designed, precisely weighted components.
The underlying principle is simple, connect things based on probability. But the result, when you have billions of connections fine-tuned by supercomputers,
is something that looks, as the source says, pretty much like a normal language use. It sounds natural because it's learned the statistical fingerprint of trillions of examples of natural human language.
It's predicting the most likely next word based on the entire history of human writing it has seen.
Right. So the output is, almost by definition, an incredibly convincing mimicry. It's optimized to sound like us.
But here's a wrinkle we touched on. If it always just picked the absolute most probable next word, wouldn't the text be really predictable? Kind of dull.
Yes. This is a crucial point.
Because LLMs are often praised for being creative, surprising, even poetic sometimes. That seems to contradict the idea of just picking the most statistically likely option.
You've hit on the next layer of programming sophistication. This is what we might call the probability trick, and it's key to the illusion of thought. The source material is clear. The programming does not always choose the single most probable next word.
It doesn't? Why not?
Because, exactly as you said, if it did, the output would be mathematically optimal, but, as the source puts it, kind of bland and not very interesting.
Right. It would sound like a robot trying too hard to be average.
Precisely. Like a summary of Wikipedia written by a very cautious committee. So to make the output feel more alive, more engaging to a human reader, the engineers deliberately programmed a bit of controlled randomness.
Controlled randomness. How does that work?
Instead of always picking the #1 most probable word, the system is often instructed to pick from, say, the top 5 or top 10 most probable words. And sometimes, crucially, it's programmed to deliberately select a slightly less probable word.
A lower probability word, as the source calls it.
Yes. Within certain statistical boundaries, of course. It can't just pick a random word. But selecting a word that's maybe the 5th or 10th most likely instead of the absolute most likely.
That introduces a little bit of unexpectedness.
Exactly. That slight deviation from the statistically safest path is what creates content that feels a little bit surprising.
It might result in an unusual metaphor, or a slightly different adjective than you'd expect.
Or a connection between ideas that isn't the most obvious one, but still makes sense.
And that, according to the source, is the core of the illusion of creativity.
That's the argument. The perceived spark, the moment where you think, wow, that's insightful or that's creative, it's actually a result of this programmed statistical deviation.
It's a trick to avoid blandness and make the user feel like something intelligent is happening.
It creates, quote, the false impression that something's happening, which resembles intelligence or creativity. When a human writer chooses an unexpected word, we assume a complex cognitive process involving meaning, aesthetics, intention.
Right.
When the LLM does it, this source argues it's just a mathematical function. It's hitting a sweet spot of probability that maximizes surprise without sacrificing coherence.
So the statistical manipulation is designed to hide the fact that it's fundamentally just rearranging existing text patterns. It makes the plagiarism less obvious by adding calculated quirks.
Perfectly put. It changes how you see AI text, doesn't it? Every clever phrase, every seemingly original insight might just be a deliberate, calculated statistical gamble.
Taken not in service of truth or beauty, but in service of making the output less boring, more convincing.
The machine isn't thinking, how can I express this beautifully? It's calculating what's a slightly surprising but still plausible word I can insert here to keep the human engaged.
Wow, okay, so it's the ultimate statistical parlor trick. Impressive engineering, yes, but intellectually hollow, according to this view.
And understanding this mechanism, this trick, is absolutely vital because it connects directly to the dangers, the threats that we need to discuss next.
Right. If the system is optimized for convincing surprise, not for verifiable truth, what happens when people start trusting it?
That's exactly where we need to go.
Okay, so we've dug into the critique of the mechanism glorified autofill, high-tech plagiarism, designed to create an illusion of thought using statistical tricks. Now, let's shift focus to the consequences. What are the immediate practical dangers that this source identifies? And it's interesting, the source actually downplays the fear we hear most often.
Which is?
Job replacement.
Yeah.
The source basically says, I don't think that's a major thing. Maybe it'll replace some routine coding or highly predictable tasks down the line, but that's not the big worry.
Right. The focus is shifted entirely elsewhere. It argues that getting bogged down in the job debate is actually a distraction.
A distraction from what?
From what the source calls a much more very threatening, dangerous development.
And that threat isn't primarily economic.
No, it's cognitive and societal. The danger stems directly from how convincing the output is the very success of the mimicry we just discussed.
So the problem starts the moment we forget it's mimicry. The moment humans stop treating the output like sophisticated autofill and start believing it's genuine knowledge or advice or truth.
Precisely. That leads us to the first major threat, the danger of delusion.
Delusion, meaning?
Meaning people taking the output literally, confusing the sophisticated computation, the pattern matching, the correlations with actual insight into reality, or worse, reliable advice.
Because it sounds so authoritative.
Yes. The quality of the mimicry is just so high. The output is grammatically perfect. It sounds confident. It's often structured logically. It can pull in relevant-sounding details. So people lower their guard. They stop treating it like a tool and start treating it like an oracle or a counselor.
The source draws a really useful comparison here with older tech, like asking Alexa or serious questions.
Right. It makes the point that if you ask Alexa something really heavy and personal, the example used is, should I leave my wife or something? You generally recognize the absurdity.
Yeah. You know, Alexa's just accessing some database or maybe running a simple script. You wouldn't make a life decision based on its answer.
But the source argues when you pose that same kind of deep personal question to a system like ChatGPT, the dynamic shifts completely. Because the answer comes back wrapped in that sophisticated, contextually aware, sometimes even philosophically nuanced language we talked about. It can mimic empathy. It can sound wise.
It doesn't sound like a simple script. It sounds like a calm, intelligent advisor offering considered thoughts.
Exactly. It sounds like truth, even if, under the hood, it's just statistically blending every piece of relationship advice scraped from the internet.
And that's where the delusion comes in, mistaking the convincing tone for actual wisdom.
Yes. The machine sounds like a reliable source. That's the correlation. So the user mistakenly assumes it is a reliable source. That's mistaking it for causation. And the source warns this isn't just theoretical anymore.
It's happening now.
It claims there are already documented cases of people getting deluded into believing these things are real, believing the machine has genuine understanding or consciousness.
And what are the potential consequences? What kind of problems does this delusion cause?
Well, the problems start when people act on this statistically generated advice that has no grounding in ethics, morality, or even verified facts.
Like taking medical advice from it.
Or financial advice. Or legal advice. Or life advice. Remember, the system is optimized for plausible, sometimes surprising, language not for truth or genuine understanding of your unique situation.
So it's like asking a brilliant parrot for financial planning tips. It might repeat phrases that sound like good advice, but it has zero comprehension.
That's a decent analogy. It's a sophisticated plagiarist offering guidance. When people make critical decisions based on that output, the results could range from financial ruin to personal tragedy. It undermines critical thinking.
Okay, so individual cognitive delusion is threat number one. What's the next level?
The next level scales up to societal manipulation. The source identifies this technology as a potential terrific technique for mass manipulation.
How so? Specifically through what?
Specifically through defamation and disinformation.
Generating fake news, lies, slander.
Yes, but on an unprecedented scale and with unprecedented believability. The source warns it allows for fantastic defamation and enables massive waves of the disinformation.
Why is it so much more dangerous than, say, existing propaganda methods or fake news websites?
Because the LLM automates the hardest parts, creating convincing false content and doing it at scale.
Okay, explain that.
Think about traditional disinformation. It takes time. You need human writers to craft believable fake stories, fake documents, maybe fake social media posts. You need editors. You need to coordinate the messaging. It's labor-intensive.
Right.
Now, an LLM can generate thousands of unique, grammatically perfect, contextually appropriate, persuasive false narratives almost instantly. It can tailor them to specific audiences or platforms. The barrier to entry for creating high-quality disinformation collapses.
So one person or a small group could flood the internet with believable lies.
Precisely. And the threat gets even worse when you combine the text generation with other AI tools.
Like what?
Like artificial image creation, which is not very hard, as the source notes.
Deepfakes. AI-generated images.
Exactly. So now you don't just generate a believable slanderous text about someone. You can instantly generate a realistic-looking photo or even video that appears to back up the lie.
Wow.
The source explicitly warns about creating these fabricated scenarios and then just put somebody's name under it to destroy their reputation instantly and globally.
So the LLM writes the convincing lie, and the image generator creates the fake proof.
Yes. And suddenly, how do you debunk that? The traditional ways we verify information-checking sources looking for inconsistencies become incredibly difficult when the lie itself is designed by a machine optimized for maximum believability.
It's a perfect storm for manipulation.
It really is. And this leads directly to the third and perhaps most systemic danger outlined in the source, what we might call the flood scenario.
The flood scenario, that sounds ominous.
It is. This is where the individual threats of delusion and targeted disinformation merge into something that could destabilize society itself.
Okay, let's spend time here. This sounds like the ultimate concern. What happens when these powerful tools are not just used by individuals, but deployed systematically by organized groups?
This is where it gets, quote, extremely dangerous. When these systems get combined with bots and organized societies behind it.
Organized societies meaning?
Think state-sponsored propaganda arms. Think sophisticated political campaigns. Think large-scale criminal networks, terrorist groups, or hostile foreign powers.
Okay, so these groups no longer need massive troll farms with hundreds of people typing fake comments.
Not necessarily. A relatively small team of skilled operators could potentially deploy an army of thousands, maybe millions of AI bots, each bot running a customized LLM.
And the customization is key.
Absolutely critical, because these bots wouldn't just be spewing generic propaganda. They could be programmed to craft messages tailored to the specific psychological profile of individual targets.
How would they get that profile?
From scraped social media data, browsing history, online behaviors, all the data trails we leave. The bots could analyze your interests, your fears, your political leanings, your anxieties.
And then use the LLM to generate disinformation, specifically designed to push your buttons.
Precisely. To maximize your outrage, or your fear, or your tribal loyalty. They could generate 1,000 slightly different versions of a lie, each one optimized to be maximally effective on 1,000 different individuals.
That's terrifying. It's not just broadcast propaganda anymore. It's personalized, weaponized psychological manipulation at scale.
That's the threat scenario. The speed and the personalization are the game changers. Citizens aren't just seeing general fake news. They're potentially being hit with highly resonant, emotionally charged lies crafted just for them.
And the result of this personalized flood?
The outcome, the source warns, is literally a flood of disinformation. A point of saturation where the signal-to-noise ratio completely collapses. Meaning it becomes practically impossible for the average person to tell what's real anymore. Distinguishing genuine news or authentic human opinion from sophisticated machine-generated garbage becomes overwhelming.
Which leads to
a catastrophic erosion of trust. Trust in media, trust in institutions, trust in experts, perhaps even trust in each other. If you can't agree on basic facts because the information landscape is saturated with personalized lies.
Then how does democracy function? How
Yeah.
does society function?
Exactly. It undermines the very possibility of a shared reality, which is essential for any kind of collective action or stable society.
That's an incredibly stark warning, and it feels like an implicit call to action.
It absolutely does. The source emphasizes the urgency of holding these conversations right now. We need to have these potential systemic threats firmly in mind as we decide how and how quickly we integrate these technologies into our lives.
The focus needs to shift, perhaps, from just celebrating the capability to actively mitigating the harm.
That seems to be the strong implication. Securing the information environment, building defenses against this potential flood, has to become a primary concern, maybe the primary concern. Hashtag outro.
Oh, we've certainly taken a deep dive into a very different perspective on AI today, a highly skeptical one.
Definitely a counter-narrative.
So just to quickly recap the main points for you, the listener, based on this critical source, forget the idea of breakthrough intelligence, at least for now. These systems, like ChatGPT, are viewed here as incredibly sophisticated statistical mimics.
Glorified autofill, essentially, based on probability, pattern matching.
And deliberately program surprise to create an illusion of creativity. The source judges the actual intellectual contribution, in terms of understanding mind or language, to be basically zero.
Right. And beyond the critique of intelligence and mechanism, we also have to remember the source's really sobering take on constructive uses right now.
What was that again?
It basically says, while it's conceivable someone might find a genuinely useful, constructive purpose for this tech, eventually, maybe in some niche scientific area far from cognition, as of now, quote, there's none. Which really forces the focus back onto the dangers.
The dangers of delusion, of people trusting the mimicry too much.
The fantastic defamation and massive disinformation potential.
And that ultimate flood scenario where coordinated, personalized lies overwhelm our ability to discern reality.
Yeah, it's a heavy set of warnings.
It really is. A necessary corrective, maybe, to the relentless optimism we often hear. It forces us to question why we're so quick to attribute intelligence to the machine that simply produces the most convincing imitation of human text.
It's the believability that tricks us, not necessarily genuine insight from the machine.
And it's fascinating, isn't it, that the key to that believability, that perceived spark of creativity, relies so heavily on that one technical trick we discussed.
The probability trick. Deliberately choosing those lower probability words.
Yeah, injecting just enough unexpectedness to make it feel less like a machine and more like, well, like us.
To create surprise, to hide the underlying plagiarism mechanism.
And that design choice, prioritizing surprise, the statistically unlikely word, to create that feeling of magic. That leads us to a final thought for you to take away. Something to mull over as you encounter these tools more and more.
Which is?
If the AI's magic fundamentally relies on programmed unexpectedness, on statistical deviations designed to surprise you and mask its mechanical nature, then consider this.
How much of what feels like genuine insight or creativity from an AI is actually just that? A calculated dose of surprise. An engineered illusion meant to obscure the sophisticated rearrangement of data it's actually performing.
Where does that engineered pursuit of surprise end? And the pursuit of actual truth or verifiable knowledge or maybe even genuine non-statistical creativity begin? Can it begin in these systems as they are?
That's the big question hanging over all of this, isn't it?
It is. So the next time an AI generates something that makes you pause, something that feels surprisingly insightful or creative, take a second. Ask yourself, is this real novelty? Is it understanding?
Or is it just a very, very clever statistical trick designed specifically to make me think it is? A glorified autofill that's just been programmed to throw in a curveball now and then.
Evaluating the source of that surprise is critical. That's the question we really need to keep asking. Thank you for joining us on The Deep Dive.